Hello there, everyone. This is Gregory Brennan, the Sustainable Transportation and Infrastructure Manager with Virginia Clean Cities. Welcome to today's Virginia Clean Cities Technology Happy Hour. Today's guest is VEIC, and they will be talking about technical assistance for bus fleets and the keys to success. If you'd like to have more information about VEIC or Virginia Clean Cities, please feel free to leave a comment below or reach out to us directly from the emails that are in the description. With that, I will pass it over to Dave.
Okay. Thanks, Gregory. Appreciate it. Welcome, everybody. Glad you could all make it today to hear about the benefits of technical assistance and also some of the things we've seen. I'm Dave Gelman. I'm a business development manager here at VEIC. I've been involved with Virginia Clean Cities for a long time. I tell people Alan's actually the fourth executive director that I've worked with at Virginia Clean Cities. If you can go ahead and flip to the next slide, Gregory. I'm joined today by Brian Picariello. He's our lead for clean transportation here at VEIC, and Ben Lake, who's one of our senior staff members and involved in a lot of our projects. And he's also a former Clean Cities coordinator for Maine. So we're pleased to have them join us today and give you some of the real nuts and bolts of what we're talking about. Go ahead and flip to the next one, Gregory. For those who aren't familiar with who we are, VEIC, and regrettably, no, the V is not for Virginia. It is for Vermont, but we've actually worked in about 22 states over our 40-year history. It's for the Vermont Energy Investment Corporation, but we pretty much go by the initials at this point. So just think VEIC. We are a mission-driven nonprofit, so we're a little bit different than what a lot of consulting firms look like. We're focused on greenhouse gas reductions and energy equity. We're trying to help everybody. That's kind of the way we look at, these clean energy solutions. Within that, we focus on energy efficiency, building decarbonization, transportation electrification, and enabling clean and flexible grid. We're sort of a hybrid. We do administer several large energy efficiency programs like the DC Sustainable Energy Utility, Efficiency Vermont, and Efficiency Smart. And we also work on several other large-scale administration programs in Wisconsin and Hawaii, California, things like that. But we also have the consulting side, and that's really more the perspective that you're going to get from us today, is really on that consulting side. But having both sides actually allows us to really have both sides influence the other. We have a lot of programs where we have people who are boots on the ground day in and day out, and they influence our consulting division. Meanwhile, our consulting division may do things like program design that helps out the administration side for programs. So it's actually kind of nice that we can do that, and we are kind of unusual in that regard. Altogether, we've worked in probably about 40 states, working with states, utilities, federal agencies and labs, nonprofits, and private industry. Go ahead and go to the next one, Gregory. Okay, in clean transportation, we do a lot of technical assistance, and we kind of have it broken down in two different areas, one being fleet services, one being consumer services. We've got about 20 staff overall supporting this, located actually throughout the country, as you're going to find out. For example, Brian is actually in Boston, Ben is in Maine, I'm in Arlington, Virginia, and we have staff in New York State, we have staff a whole bunch of places, and obviously some folks in Vermont. Again, under our transportation services, we really focus on how to help fleets plan for electrification, how to get the vehicles or the charging equipment, how to look at load management so that they can reduce their costs, the infrastructure, charging needs, time. If you don't look at the infrastructure when you're helping a fleet electrify, you're kind of doing them a disservice. And like I said, we work with a lot of different types of fleets. We also work on anything from light duty all the way up to heavy duty vehicles. And that includes even designing and implementing comprehensive transition plans. Since 2019, we've probably helped electrify maybe more than 50 fleets in at least 7 states. We also do the consumer side though too. We do a lot on education and outreach, dealer engagement, stakeholder convening and engagement, and try and look at the barriers to encouraging adoption, especially in disadvantaged communities and rural communities. We actually do a little bit of a specialty, I think, among a lot of consulting firms looking at EV deployment for rural areas. We're also managing Drive Electric Vermont, which is a relatively comprehensive program and award-winning that helps enable EV adoption in Vermont through bringing together all of the information that individual drivers may need to make the decision to move to electrics. We're also doing an information hub on EVs for Clean Energy Center, Massachusetts Clean Energy Center too. So we do work on the consumer side too. But today we're really going to be focused on fleet services. Don't do it yet, Gregory. Okay, if you remember nothing else from today's presentation, you're going to remember this next slide. Go ahead. Okay. The soapbox is you can't drop these technologies in from outer space and believe they're going to succeed. You got to have technical assistance for success. It's not just for the planning side, but program design, implementation, even help with identification of funds, everything. You need technical assistance to make sure that these new technologies can really succeed in fleets. It starts with outreach, which is really the educational aspect. And then when you move toward demonstrations, deployments, or pilot programs, you really have to start at the beginning. You've got to first look at what is the fleet? How do you use the vehicles? While it's going on, you got to look at what your needs are along the way. You got to look at when the vehicles show up. You got to make sure everything's right. You got to make sure that the infrastructure is getting off the ground properly. There may be training needs. You may have to help people in the beginning. And also you got to look at data collection throughout, because you got to know what you got for your money. Without doing data collection and analysis, you won't have the information you need to make future decisions. And also what we found is by doing real-time data collection and analysis, we can often identify operational issues that can be fixed along the way. Somebody may be simply charging their vehicle at the wrong time and creating a real headache, not only for operation, but also for cost. So, again, there's a lot during a project where you need to do technical assistance. Afterwards, again, you're going to be looking at what did you get for your money. You're going to look at evaluation. You're going to look at case studies, and you're going to be trying to help people make the future decisions. We've kind of laid out these steps in this sort of little block diagram that you're going to see at the bottom. You're going to see that at the top when we talk about individual projects. But keep that in mind that technical assistance needs are different throughout the span of a project, but they're critically important at each stage. We do a lot of this now. For example, for electric school buses, where one of the areas we're probably most known for, we've done state-funded programs in Maine, Vermont, Massachusetts, Delaware, and Montana, including the Massachusetts CEC ACT Bus program, which is actually helping a lot of fleets in Massachusetts get used to the technologies, learn what they need to do, and actually plan for successful implementation. We also work nationally for the National Renewable Energy Lab, providing technical assistance under the Clean Bus Planning Assistance Program, including for Charlottesville, Virginia. And as you'll see, we've also worked regionally with Virginia Clean Cities, teamed on a project for the U.S. Department of Energy focused on exposing school bus fleets to the technology. One thing to keep in mind is when you think about technical assistance needs, you need to think about when you need to plan for it, which from our standpoint is really as early as you can, but also how it's going to get paid for. There may be programs that can help you pay for your technical assistance too. For example, if you know about the Federal Transit Administration's low-no emission program, you can actually get some technical assistance paid for under that. Basically, we're always happy to chat about that and answer questions for people as they arise. We do that for a lot of fleets now. With that, I'll turn it over to Ben.
Thanks, Dave. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Gregory, if you could move to the next slide, please. So I will take a few minutes to provide a few example projects that we've worked on that I think help illustrate the different aspects of technical assistance and the benefit that they provide. So this first one, I think was appropriate to begin with, both because it's really focused on the outreach portion, which is at the beginning, as Dave noted, of a lot of technical assistance efforts that we do, but also because it was focused on the Mid-Atlantic, and we worked very closely with Virginia Clean Cities, who was actually the lead on implementing this project. So we were providing technical assistance on their behalf. And so ultimately the client, it was a U.S. Department of Energy Clean Cities grant, and Virginia Clean Cities was the prime. And this was several years ago. I think the grant came about in 2019, and we worked on it in 2020 and 2021. And really the purpose at the time was to build awareness and accelerate adoption of electric school buses in those 5 Mid-Atlantic states: Virginia, Maryland, Washington, D.C., Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. And so we partnered with other Clean Cities coalitions there to help do the outreach that was needed to spread the word about these. That project was a bit challenging in a few regards. One, of course, it coincided with the arrival of COVID, and so a lot of the planned in-person outreach that we were expecting to do sort of got derailed. It may seem hard to remember now, but it predated the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the $5 billion of funding that went to the EPA for their clean school bus program. That program didn't exist at that point, and so there were very few electric school buses on the road at that point, even fewer that were available to be seen or brought as demos from major manufacturers. And so we were really trying to lay basic groundwork to help inform the market in those 5 states and get people interested enough to want to welcome a depot or a demo into their fleet for a bit and have some experience with it, and hopefully consider it moving forward. So we had a number of takeaways, I think, from that project. It iterated several times as a result of some of those challenges that I mentioned, but like we've listed here, key takeaways were that really, and if this is the Clean Cities audience, I think you'll all understand this, that exposing fleets to technology really is critical for adoption. We needed to get butts and seats. We needed to have dealers or folks, the limited number of fleets that had an electric school bus or two already, get those to events, get people on them to ride them, give them the opportunity to ask their questions. Whenever we could, we tried to pair maintenance folks who were working or supporting, or fleet folks who were supporting the vehicles in their fleet already with their equivalents who were actually had the technical expertise because of prior management of electric school buses. And that's where we found really the greatest breakthroughs. There are lots of questions that fleets need to answer before their deployment. And they don't always know the ones to ask. Certainly, adding charging infrastructure in is a big one that, for the most part, fleet managers haven't historically had to think a lot about charging. And then also maintenance considerations as well. There were key tools and trainings that were needed that we really went through and developed under the project. We identified a number of hurdles to moving this project and just larger adoption forward as part of this, and surface that up to the Department of Energy, and helped Clean Cities coalitions around here understand those, and I think really effectively laid the groundwork for this much larger deployment that came as a result of those the federal funding through the EPA's Clean School Bus program. And then, as I mentioned, addressing charging is particularly important. So getting the buses to depots was not nearly as hard as planning for how are they going to charge once they're there, even just for the demo purposes, but also, the charging side of things is much more complex typically than the vehicle side of things. And because fleet managers, at least in our experience, haven't had as much experience with that, or hadn't at the time, we found that a lot of hand-holding and a lot of explaining and just impartial, objective help was really key there to be able to develop the trust and the confidence that if they ordered these buses, they would work properly for them. So next slide, please. So another electric school bus technical support project that we worked on also under the outreach umbrella was all the way up in Maine, where I'm based. And so this was, this has been a multi-year effort that we've been coordinating closely with the state Department of Education, also the state governor's office, because this electric school bus adoption has been a priority for the current administration in our state. And
this information.
Oh, yeah, sorry, overhearing the information. I'll get to that. So we focused on figuring out what school districts needed to be able to first of all, just have a basic understanding of electric school bus technology because there were very few deployed in Maine at that time. We actually worked on the first deployment in the state on Mount Desert Island. And so that helped put us in a position to spread the word. We also did an evaluation there, which Brian will talk about in a little bit, which again provided objective information and kind of primed the pump in the state. But at the same time, as we were going through all of this, the EPA's Clean School Bus program came out, and there was a lot of desire from the state government to get districts to take advantage of that. And of course, it was very hard for districts who hadn't been exposed to technology before to even contemplate the idea of applying for buses that they wouldn't know how to implement. And they were getting bombarded with dealers and manufacturers who were saying this is a great opportunity, you should do it. And understandably, we're a little bit hesitant. So we did our best to help provide objective information in partnership with the Department of Education. And so I think that gave legitimacy to the information that we were sharing because it was vetted and endorsed by the Department of Education. It kind of cut through a lot of the advertising clutter and such that a lot of schools were hearing in the, from the fallout of the initial rollout of the Clean School Bus program and kind of the frenzy that followed. And we also provided direct technical assistance to individual schools that were contemplating a grant application, had questions about how are we going to charge these things? Is this a reasonable price? The manufacturer, the dealer is saying, I need this really expensive charging infrastructure and I don't have the capacity to be able to do it. Can we get by with something else? Or, oh, they're saying this project can't work because charging needs to run this far, and then we could help them identify alternative places where they might be able to install a level 2 charger at a much lower cost that could make it financially viable. And then there were also questions on the school board and school district side that were very hesitant about signing up for a grant application that they weren't sure was going to make financial sense for them, even with the significant subsidy that was available. So we were really just there as an objective voice to help be a trusted energy advisor to them and a project advisor. So some of the takeaways from that project, and it's still ongoing, by the way, in particular for school districts, small and mid-sized districts often really have limited staff capacity to support electric school bus planning and deployment. Very new technology, very few people who have dedicated time to be able to focus on learning this new technology and planning and implementing a project. So having an independent entity that can come in and really be their sort of buyer's rep or advisor to work with dealers, work with manufacturers, work with charging vendors can be, and also answer questions to staff and to boards can be exceedingly helpful. And we heard that over and over again from the districts that we worked with. And also we really ran into, electric school bus misinformation that was circulating in parts of the state due to a variety of factors, and we know has been active nationally. And so a lot of school boards, or at least portions of them, were encountering this, were raising this information as real hurdles, and were opposing moving forward based on, frankly, faulty information, which was really unfortunate. And so we presented at a few boards and answered questions and helped sway the outcomes in a couple of cases. But again, those are things that typical school district staff, or really most fleet managers, are not prepared to be able to jump in on short notice. And so we were grateful to be able to provide that support. Next slide, please. So off of school buses to more general fleet electrification, we worked with Rhode Island Energy, which is an electric and gas utility in Rhode Island to provide fleet electrification planning support to many of their different customers, anyone really who was interested in participating. So we conducted 25 different fleet electrification studies across the state amongst a variety of different fleets, so public, municipal, state, private, commercial, healthcare, public transit, water districts, all different types, and help them to really assess near-term electrification options. So like low-hanging fruit that we're going to help provide them with early wins that would be relatively easy lifts for them and make cost-effective sense. They also paired well with Rhode Island Energy was offering incentives for charging infrastructure and make-ready support, as well as the charging units themselves. And it involved a lot of stakeholder engagement, talking to different folks at each fleet entity about what their priorities were, what their concerns were, what really had to be addressed in order to get the buy-in that was needed from their particular organization to be able to move forward. And that really varied, organization to organization and business to business. And we developed, after analyzing their routes and their operational profile and their facilities, we developed specific vehicle and charging recommendations for them and guidance on how to pair that with the incentives that were available through the utility. And some key takeaways there, and there's a link once you get this copy to the case study that we wrote up about this. So I hope you'll check that out after this presentation. These pilot fleet studies really showed that there were a lot of short-term cost-effective replacements for comparative vehicles at the time. And this was back starting in 2019. So even then we were looking at mostly sedans and small SUVs, and now the market has really opened up pretty dramatically since then. And we were really buoyed to hear that many fleets had reported that they were going to move forward with adopting EVs and were actually moving forward with including EVs in their capital budgets as a result of the studies, and having that document, that plan in front of them that clearly ran the numbers, provided them a total cost of ownership analysis, and showed objectively, this is what we expect your cost savings will be, and this is what you need to do to move forward with this and take advantage of these incentives. So those really, I think, helped close the deal for a number of fleets that we worked with. Next slide, please. And then last one that I'll highlight is a Vermont-specific one. So we are providing transit electrification planning support for Vermont transit agencies on behalf of the Vermont Agency of Transportation, which is equivalent to the Department of Transportation in many states. So really, our purpose here in contracting with VTrans is to help them achieve their statewide transit electrification goals, which are fairly aggressive, over the next 10 years by providing technical assistance to the 7 different public transit agencies in the state on transit electrification, planning and implementation and deployment support. And so you can see here, this actually covers, this has been a multi-year effort that we've been supporting. And for each fleet, we've been at different stages, helping them plan for a deployment, helping them actually move forward with that deployment, with that pilot, actually deploy, troubleshoot issues as they come up, and then in some cases actually do detailed evaluations and write case studies to show, did you actually achieve the cost savings that you were expecting? Did you achieve the emission savings? And what were the key learnings from all of this that can then be shared with other districts in the state to help inform their own planning and deployments and answer questions that they likely have as well. Another big component of this, every year we've been writing LONO, FTA LONO grant applications for VTrans. I note down in the takeaway that we've developed 8 of those projects and put forth 8 applications, and all of them have been successful. Every single one has been awarded by the FTA, and obviously we've got a very effective track record going with Vermont, and they've been excellent partners. So I think it really speaks to the compelling cases that we could make there. One of the takeaways that we have taken from this, and each agency has been different, and even though they're all transit agencies, they all have their different challenges and priorities, and are at different stages of this process. Most of them have at least a couple vehicles at this point. Some of them have significantly more, and some of them are, moving forward with big facility upgrades that are planning for full electrification capability in the future. But one thing that's come up is that sometimes the small sort of pilot and projects that we talked about, for example, on the last slide where we talked about the low-hanging fruit and just kind of dipping your toe in the water, those can sometimes be challenging for agencies to execute successfully because there's such a small amount of the fleet. They often don't necessarily require the same amount of day-to-day attention that a larger deployment does if you were, say, switching over a third of your fleet or more. But they still come with a lot of the same similar challenges in terms of learning new technologies, learning the interfaces between the vehicles and the charging infrastructure and computers and maintenance, and making sure that drivers and maintenance staff and so forth are trained and understand these things. And so sometimes what can happen is that because they're a smaller portion of the fleet, they don't get the same degree of priority and the same degree of attention. And so they might be more prone to languish and be underutilized. And so that can end up looking at like an unsuccessful deployment when in reality, it could have been very successful if they simply had developed or devoted more staff time to it and saw it more as like the phase one of a much larger land deployment. And again, I think that's an area where we try to fit in where we can identify those issues and provide a little bit more of that direct support by reaching out on behalf to vendors or addressing specific challenges that are bubbling up that we're hearing from agencies and doing research on those and coming back to them with guidance on how to approach those. So I've probably spoken enough at this point. I'll be happy to answer questions at the end, and I will turn it over to my colleague, Brian.
Excellent. Thanks, Ben, and thanks everybody for taking some time out of your day to be here with us. So I'll take us through a couple other examples. First, one on deployment, and then another few on the evaluation front, and then one kind of putting all the pieces together. So this next one we'll talk about, the Vermont DEC hired us to administer a school and transit bus electrification pilot throughout the state. So we supported 3 districts and 1 transit agency with another number of activities, including vendor solicitation, planning for facilitating facility upgrades and charging installation, developing a managed charging plan, and then evaluating performance for 12 months. So what did we find? And as with some of the other examples we shared, there are some publicly available reports and press releases for this one. Would welcome you to check them out after if you're interested. So we found that the electric buses met the daily operational needs, which is demonstrated by the graph on the right there. So you'll see the orange bars represent the daily needs in range of miles, and the blue bars are the average real world range for those vehicles. You can see that in each case, the battery capacity was plenty to perform the daily route, even in cold weather. There were certain instances, though, where midday charging was needed for their routes. So we also found that all of the school buses saw fuel cost savings and emissions reductions compared to the scrapped diesel buses. So as is likely not new information for you all, the O&M savings are one of the biggest primary drivers of going electric, combined with emissions reductions. On the savings front, Champlain Valley, one of the districts, had the most savings, and that was primarily driven by having long paved routes, little elevation change, combined with strong vehicle reliability. On the reliability front, reliability was a little mixed. So for both the buses and the chargers, we looked at reliability and uptime for both groups of assets. For 5 of the 6 buses, we found in-service rates to be comparable to diesel, kind of in the 60 to 90% range, depending on which particular asset we're looking at. Most of the outages that impacted those 5 buses lasted only a few days and were due to preventative maintenance, minor repairs, typical wear and tear. The one bus that had relatively low reliability saw weeks and months-long outages, and that was primarily driven to issues around the drivetrain, as well as some thermal management system issues. Finally, the drivers and students like the buses. So the feedback, the experience feedback, which is a theme you'll see in another slide, it was very well received by drivers and students. who found, especially the drivers, found that the buses were quiet, which led to calmer riders. Next slide, please. All righty. So this next one, now we're getting into evaluation. So we've talked about deployment, we've talked about piloting, getting buses on the road, getting chargers installed. Now helping clients report back to funders, report back to agencies on how are these things going, and also then looping back to their own operational plans to adjust as needed. So in 2021, Mount Desert Island, which Ben noted earlier, Mount Desert Island High School in Maine purchased and deployed the first school bus in the state. So we were hired by a Climate to Thrive to assess the emissions reductions, operational savings, and they were very interested in seeing how the bus performed in the winter weather and in a rural environment. So what did we find here? So similar on performance, range, and performance was pretty satisfactory, especially for normal routes. We also found some longer distance routes were taken for field trips, and they were satisfactory there as well. We found the electric buses to be 3 times more efficient than diesel. So I think somewhere around 24 miles per gallon versus 9 equivalent. That efficiency drove operational expenses to be about 50% of what they were for diesel and reduced emissions significantly. We also found on the reliability front positive performance on the drivetrain for most of the buses, though there were some warranty replacements around some of the body equipment. And in this case, we also noted having manufactured out of the country in Canada, leading to some longer diagnostic and shipping times. That said, on the upside, we were able to identify a local mechanic who was able to complete the necessary repairs, once we made that connection going forward. Finally, buses were well received again by staff and students, and in this case led to the deployment of more school buses, more electric buses. Next slide. All right, so more evaluation and some deployment technical assistance here in Montana. So the Montana DEQ hired us to evaluate 17 buses across the state. I'm not going to dwell on the tasking in the second bullet under purpose there. You can kind of see the activities we were involved in, but I'll just kind of skip to the main takeaways, which I think are probably more salient. So what did we find here across those 17 buses that were deployed? On performance, again, a theme: performed well in all weather conditions, and across all route types. Specifically, there was note of the electric school bus starting up more consistently and reliably than diesel, and then improved acceleration and quieter operation. But there was a note that we did find that efficiency did drop by about 40% in the worst case in extremely cold conditions. So significant efficiency drop and range impact in extremely cold conditions. On cost, we found that each bus averaged about $1,500 in annual fuel savings compared to diesel. So positive on the fuel savings there again. Worth, though, a quick note on demand charges. So if you've deployed an electric school bus, in a lot of cases, we've seen demand charges be a surprise to operators. And we found here that the districts that had demand charges had 2 times higher per mile fuel cost than those that didn't. In those cases, we did work with those districts to sort of come up with a managed charging plan and manage that charging, and we're able to save some money by deploying managed charging strategies. On reliability, the electrics were available for service 82% of the time compared to about 94% for diesels. So less in service rate there. Though worth noting, about 3/4 of the out of service days for that 82% was driven by a single district. So again, one single district sort of having unfavorable performance, impacting that rate, which if you take that out, it gets up to around where the diesel rate is. And then finally, on the emissions front, no surprise here, significantly reduced emissions, even accounting for emissions driven on the generation side of things, electric generation side of things, and aux diesel heaters during the winter months. Next slide. Okay, so wrapping up here. So this one really kind of pulls everything together for us. And also touches on a little bit of our load management work. So we've been supporting the Martha's Vineyard Transit Authority for a number of years now, as they've transitioned to an all-electric fleet. So our work has been part technical assistance. It's been sort of part general contractor, like pulling all the pieces together for a solar plus storage microgrid, which serves their transit electrification. As you might imagine, no small feat. So we started the work with an alternative fuel study, and that then led to us recommending they go electric. This was way back in, I think, 2016, 2017. And primarily that recommendation was driven by high fuel costs that the transit authority is subject to on the island. That then led us to explore a microgrid solution, which was primarily driven by grid reliability risks. So the island is served by an undersea cable, which is prone to outages. So they were concerned about reliability of going all electric. They took those recommendations, and we've supported them over the years to deploy. So far they've deployed roughly 15 BYD buses, and they have a plan to purchase another 15 to get to 100% electric. They've installed induction charging, which is the picture on the top left there, which can deliver about 15 miles of range every 10 minutes or so, and help the fleet serve routes up to 300 miles. They've installed energy storage, which is sized to serve up to 400 kW of instantaneous power. They've installed 700 kW worth of solar canopies to serve all the load, which is that bottom picture. You can see the solar canopies there with the electric bus. And it's all tied together with a controller. So the controller was the most complicated part of the whole thing. If all the buses are plugged in, consumption is about 2.5 megawatts. The controller ensures that consumption stays below the installed capacity, the installed utility capacity, which is around 1 megawatt. So what did we learn here? So pros and cons to no, traditional general contractor here. So, or single entity to put the pieces together. So there was added coordination amongst multiple vendors, which a GC would traditionally take care of. But because of sort of the evolving space of those vendors, which I'll touch on further, it did allow for flexibility. It allowed the transit authority to kind of flex with and shift plans over time, which is really important in such an evolving space. Operability is key. So related to the putting the pieces together here, a lot of different types of assets, a lot of different solution providers. Given the number and the diversity of providers, interoperability has been key. And equally important is a clean user interface. So the VTA, which I think similar to a lot of transit operators, school bus operators, fleet operators don't have super IT-centric staff. So having a user-friendly interface that doesn't require babysitting all day long has proven beneficial. Utility engagement is always key. especially here. So the interconnection was the critical path throughout this whole project. And the team worked with the local utility to study multiple service and interconnection scenarios and consider injection into the grid. So export from the site onto the grid. As mentioned, it's an evolving space. So newer versions of the installed technology were released between contracting and implementation, which made things fun. And there were numerous acquisitions. So NEC bought LG, Vericity acquired ChargePoint. So a note to kind of ensure if you're going after this sort of project, think about making sure that your contract covers a potential acquisition scenario, and the contract agreement is honored in that. Finally, the evolving energy markets has provided some opportunities, but also some challenges. So the project is enrolled in the local DR program, demand response program, and plans to enroll in the state's Clean Peak program. But the assets, the installed controls and subsystems have sort of complicated playing into the wholesale market, not meeting all of the eligibility requirements there. So something to think about there. So all to say, very evolving space here. The details matter. Finding a partner to provide, general technical support, put the pieces together, can save some headache later and maybe hopefully some cost in the long run. Next slide, please. All right, so that is all we had. Again, thank you for your time. We'll take some questions, and special thanks to Alan and Gregory and all the folks at Virginia Clean Cities for putting this together. Really appreciate all the work that you guys do.
Thank you so much for listening today and checking out this webinar. This next section is the question and answer section. It's very conversational and very informal. Please feel free to continue to listen. And if you do not, thank you so much for listening. Like I said, please reach out to us here at Virginia Clean Cities. Please like or comment below. Send us an email directly. We hope we can help you in some way, shape, form, or fashion with your electric buses and your electric bus rollout. Thank you so much. And with that, I'll pass it back to myself in the webinar. I can get things rolling here. Oh, nope, just kidding. Chris has got a question. Go ahead, Chris.
This is for Brian in reference to the electric buses. So did you have any issues with rain or weather causing interference with the charging? Now, anything on the roads that could have come in between?
Yeah, good question. I don't recall that causing an issue. The charging issues we actually had were more the chargers themselves going down for periods of time, and needing to be having a troubleshooter come in and deal with that. Less that I recall around communications, if I'm hearing the question right. Yeah, I don't recall that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. It's a great question. Anyone else? I have a question here. Given what's going on at the federal level, where do you think VEIC is going to go in from here? Are you all still pursuing EVs, particularly for like fleets or school bus fleets?
Brian, you want that one or you want me to take it?
Yeah, I could start and would welcome you and jump in, and Ben jump in. I think strategically, we're committed. This is our mission. We're committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and to decarbonize. So we're here, and are going to continue to focus on it. It does change, I think, a little bit not the direction, but maybe our focus area. So deployment, very, very, being very frank, we see less deployment opportunities right now. We see, maybe state agencies, other funders kind of shifting more into planning to kind of continue to get fleet operators into a position such that if that funding environment changes at some point, they will be ready to go after some deployment funds. So that's probably the biggest shift we've seen so far. Dave, you got anything to add?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the way we look at this is we might see it as a bit of a pause or a slowdown, but it isn't a stop. Okay. The federal money was never intended to be forever anyway. It was intended to help get stuff off the ground in the beginning. At the end of the day, though, you got to figure it's really involved with the benefits of electric vehicles. It's not just the emissions, but when you start, especially when you talk school buses and you start talking about children's health or any new technology where you're talking about workforce development, which is an economic development aspect. Um, for some fleets, it's also about resiliency, diversifying their fleet fuel sources. Um, and about an inevitable shift to cleaner technologies anyway. It's going to happen. Even the clean school bus money, which was great, it was also only going to be 5 years. So it was supposed to be a boost, but only at the start. You know, as Brian said, yeah, we're definitely seeing that funding for deployment will likely be reduced in the near term, but that's not necessarily all bad. What it means is now's a good time to plan. A lot of folks who thought they were going to go ahead and start deploying and buying stuff, well, now they have that chance to step back a little bit, ask the questions that need to be asked, do the planning they need to do, so that when funding does restart, they can be ready and do it in a way that makes sense.
That's great. Thank you for that. Hannah, it looks like you have your hand raised. Feel free to come off mute.
Yes, okay, thank you so much. Oh, hi everyone, how are you doing? My name is Hannah Lacan. I'm the CEO and founder of Hercle Q. We're developing wireless charging technologies, and here I have my CTO.
Hello.
Info.
Yeah, I just have one big question. You were talking about the mini grid system and the infrastructure required for charging, saying, 10 minutes in a station gains 15 miles of usage. I was curious on what developments you have for that kind of system or protocol for advancing that in not only micromobility systems, but larger capacity systems like buses, because that 5 megawatt number just seems pretty large.
Sorry, trying to come off mute. Yeah, I think the application that we've seen, I guess, have the most adoption is exactly this transit application. I haven't seen it deployed in other applications like micromobility or even in the school bus space, which is where we have a lot of most of our experience beyond transit. And I think it's primarily driven by the use case, but I haven't seen it deployed in the micromobility space, if I'm answering your question directly.
And actually, one thing I can throw in, I've actually been a reviewer for the U.S. Department of Energy's Vehicle Technologies Office programs, including inductive charging and high power charging. And one of the areas that they have projects that they're looking at now is actually for wireless charging at high power for trucking. When you think about a truck pulling into a warehouse or a depot and sitting there for a while and offloading, that's an opportunity to add range to that truck. So there are opportunities where they're looking at that. 400, 500 kilowatt units, up to 750 kilowatt units even for a single truck.
And the range, I was kind of going back to my notes here, the range that or the power rather, I think for those assets that we did deploy or helped the authority deploy is about 150 to 300 kW. And that'll get 15 miles of range in 10 minutes. So that's the power of the assets that are deployed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And the project actually has 2 in-route charging sites like that on the island. And then they have their main depot for full charging.
Yeah.
I've got a question for you. You all take part in any like workforce development training around like buses, bus fleets, or electric bus fleets, and or the infrastructure for those? Or know of any that people are doing that?
Ben, do you want to take that?
Sure, happy to. Yeah, I was just thinking about an example. We do not provide that training directly, but we've worked with several fleets to procure that training for them or connect them with the training resources that they need. So, for example, in Vermont, with the different transit agencies that we're supporting there, part of some of the Lono awards that they've received for applications we've developed for them included requirements on providing workforce development and providing workforce training and actually setting aside a portion of the budget for that overall award towards that. And so we've been working closely with several of the awardees there to help them plan for how do we spend this money, on equipment and training supplies, but also on actually the training itself. Does it make sense to bring training to us? Does it make sense to send operators out or maintenance crews out to facilities to have that training done? And we've done a mix of both. So in some cases, like with transit bus manufacturers, they offer in-depth training on those specific vehicles at their facilities, and it makes more sense to send like a couple of really highly qualified mechanics who are new to that technology out there to spend a couple days or a week doing a deep dive into that. In other cases, we've helped coordinate more of a broad, more basic, just electrification, like kind of 101 vehicle electrification 101 training that provides the basics of doing diagnostics, basic diagnostics on low and high voltage systems, and just a more detailed overview of how these different systems work, how they differ from traditional like diesel and gasoline systems, and what basic maintenance providers need to know in order to be able to work around them confidently and effectively and safely. So there are more and more options out there now. We're seeing them pop up nationally, certainly, but also amongst like state level, at the state level, more like community colleges, recognizing that a lot of new mechanics are going to need to be fluent in electric vehicle technology in order to be able to provide these services. So we've been trying to utilize those where we can. And if we have to bring people to the facilities to be able to train mechanics, sometimes that makes the most sense just from a, either a bandwidth standpoint or cost limitation standpoint, and not having to pay for significant travel and lodging to be on for a while.
Ben did awesome job. The only thing I'd add is one thing that we've found useful at times is at the time of procurement, writing in training specifications in a contract to get the OEM or the charging vendor to commit to that. There's been times where that hasn't been done, and it's sort of the OEM or vendor training hasn't really met the bar, and it's been very simple. They're in a really good position to do the training themselves. So we found it useful at times, most times, to be writing in requirements into a contract to get them on the hook to do that.
And with that, this is a wrap for the Technology Happy Hour with VEIC. Thank you, Brian, Ben, and Dave for the presentation. If you made it this far in the recording, thank you so much for your diligence and listening. Please feel free to like, comment below, or send us an email directly with questions you might have. We hope to hear from you soon and see you at another Technology Happy Hour with Virginia Clean Cities. And until next time,